Earlier today, I took my Bleed Ritualist into T4 Xesht and I killed him like that. So there's been a lot of progress since my last build video where I was at T0 Arbiter, and I want to share with you today everything I know, everything about this build, so that you can take your Bleed Ritualist from wherever you're at to T4 Xesht on farm. Before we begin, I just want to say this build is brought to you by my community. If it wasn't for them, I'd still be struggling in T1, T2 probably. They definitely came into chat and in the comments and in the Discord and pushed me in certain directions, dropped knowledge. Even though I was hard-headed at times, eventually we got there and this build is looking really good. But you will see tech that is not mine. You'll see inspiration from Blood Mage, from Amazon, etc. But this is how we ended up scaling this Bleed Ritualist, so let's get right into it. So right off the bat, I'm sure you're probably wondering what's up with the two Tangle Tongues. Well, I was a non-believer in Tangle Tongue, to be honest, based on early testing and POB. Everything was telling me that it wasn't going to work for this Bleed Ritualist. Turned out that I just had not scaled my crit hit chance and my crit damage bonus enough in order to make it work back when I was testing it. But as I leveled and scaled the character and swapped out different passives, eventually I got there with both the crit chance and the crit damage bonus and was able to pick up good Tangle Tongues. So that's the other thing. I tested with a bad Tangle Tongue. World of difference here, so we'll get into that. But yes, what's better than one Tangle Tongue? Two Tangle Tongues. So the way I ended up scaling both Rake, which is a physical ability, Bleed is calculated based on that physical hit, and scaling Lightning Spear at the same time, which is elemental, we're using the weapon swap and two weapon set passive trees. Next, we've got the Deepest Tower Spirit Bone Crown. This is the crown jewel of the build. In my last video, I had just picked this helm up and was kind of tinkering around with it. Well, now I've been all in ever since, and I haven't taken this off my head. And as a matter of fact, my tactician, I shipped this helmet over to my tactician, put it on his head too when I'm playing it, and I'll probably do the same with my next character, honestly. We'll see. But yeah, this is a great helm. So essentially everything within your presence is considered on low life. This has interactions with our execute support gem on Rake, and we've also got passives that play into this as well. You'll see that later. But overall brings a ton of damage to the build. Now it does reduce your presence area of effect by half, which brings it to about 2 meters. So, but that's not a bad thing, because next we'll look at Beetle Bite Shoes, where this is how we're getting our aggravate bleeding on enemies when they enter your presence. When we go in for our first Rake, the enemy's in our presence and the Rake is applied. Disengage, that's further than 2 meters. Go back in for a Rake. Now they're back in your presence. You've aggravated the bleeding that's on them. You've applied an additional bleed, and you're just basically doing that as much as you need to. The other option, go back and then come in for the Blood Hunt, which is essentially going to kill most everything now. But yeah, this is how we get our aggravate. Then we've got the Venopuncture Iron Ring. I've got one on right now. Throughout building this character and scaling, I've gone from 1 to 3 to 2. Essentially pick these up and use them as you need, but this brings a lot of magnitude to your bleed. Right now, based on where the character is at, we only need one now. We might not even need one, to be honest, but this is a good ring, brings strength. This build does stretch thin on attributes, so the added strength here is really good. It brings the physical damage to attacks and that magnitude, but of course it does have the drawback where all damage taken from you while bleeding contributes to magnitude of chill on you. You can counteract that with a Staunching Charm. There's a unique Staunching Charm out there, which I used to have. I don't know what happened to it. Then, of course, we've got Tangle Tongue. Some of you out there may not be familiar with this, so we'll go over it, but it is a very popular spear right now. This fork critical hits is the major thing here, along with the amount of critical hit chance it brings. So you can see here, this is extremely high critical hit chance on a weapon. Of course, it doesn't have very high damage, but the thing is forking critical hits, essentially you are rolling twice for your criticals, and if you roll successfully on 2 criticals, that is a twice critical hit. So it's not just applying the critical damage bonus once, it's applying it twice. Huge damage there. This is what allows for those big blood hunt kills that you see online and that you saw in the showcase earlier. But let's go to blood hunt and just take a look. So my critical hit chance with blood hunt is 100%. More importantly, twice critical hit chance is 100%. That is the goal for blood hunt. You want to twice critical hit with this thing every time. And again, that's the explosion you see on those bosses. That does it for the uniques. Now, the beauty about this is all of these uniques are very affordable on the market, so long as you're not going for maximum rolls on the modifiers. But say this Tangle Tongue, for instance, this is gonna run, 20 div or so because of the double rune slot and the 19 critical hit chance, and then a very healthy roll on the physical damage. Plus, I've got the Soul Cores of Takaba, which cost some div there as well. But you can get into this for pretty cheap. And sure, it's not gonna one-shot T4 Xesht for you right off the bat, but that's how you start scaling this. You get into the build and then you start replacing as you go along. Now overall, I'm probably looking at 150 to 200 div on my character right now. This breach ring really pushes it over the edge, but you can get into this build very affordable with these uniques and make some sacrifices with the rare gear, and then you can scale along the way and make your investments as you farm your currency. Moving on to the rares, starting with the shield. Shields play a big role both defensively and offensively in this build, but make sure you get your block chance over 40%. And then I'm bringing the triple res. Max life, I am targeting on all my gear basically. Then of course we've got a bunch of armor on the shield. And that brings us to our amulet, and you can see we've allocated offensive stance as our anoint. That gives us 1% increased damage for every 1% block chance, and we're sitting over 70% block chance on this build. So it brings a lot of damage to the table. And then for the rest, you're gonna need the spirit, and then you want that critical damage bonus. And then I've got rarity on this one, and then life regen. You do want to pick up some life regen on something because of the ritualist. There's an ascendancy we'll go over that plays into that, but make sure that you have some life regen. You don't want zero. Then accuracy's on this amulet, but of course it's not as big a deal for us as opposed to the Amazon, but some accuracy helps for evasive mobs and whatnot, making sure that you keep your hit cap. And then our unset ring here, this build does require an extra skill slot. You can choose to drop something. Bloodhound's Mark would probably be what I drop if I had to drop something. You want physical damage to attacks on all your rings. You want the maximum life. I had to roll strength and dex on this. Otherwise, I'd probably go for another resistance. Another really good one is lightning damage to attacks. Then we go to the breach ring here. Now, this was handed to me from the community. I would not have this on if I didn't get this gift. This is what you'd be working towards if in your late game. This is what I was basically working towards. I had to spend a lot of div on other things, but this is like the dream ring here for the ritualist. And this build, hold, physical, and lightning flat damage. It's scaling both the bleed and the lightning spear. Now, this doesn't bring as much bleed damage as a venopuncture, but getting that extra flat damage for your lightning spear helps a tremendous amount. If you don't have access to a breach ring like this, it's fine. You're still looking for similar rolls, that flat damage across the board, I'd say, for this ring slot. If you don't have that, just put another venopuncture in. Then a note about venopuncture, these are pretty cheap on the market, so you can buy pretty much max rolls, and then quality and corrupt, and you're looking for a critical corruption. I rolled a maximum mana, which is fine, but I'll probably try again if I'm really looking to min max here. But we use the physical modifiers on this to improve both the physical damage and the magnitude of bleeding. So the magnitude of bleeding was 25%. We qualityed up to 30%. We've got 8 to 15 physical damage to attacks versus the 7 to 13 max roll here. This is a great venopuncture ring, but they're affordable on the market. And you'll notice that this is the only ring I have corrupted. I haven't corrupted my amulets or rings. Really, the reason being is I don't have enough div to replace it if it breaks. So I'm not touching it for now. Be very careful about that. This breach ring, we'll see about it. Then we've got the gloves. Of course, you're looking for the flat physical damage to attacks, and then an added roll to an elemental is great for the lightning spear side of things. Max life, kind of low roll here, and then 2 level to all melee skills. You can go projectile skills instead for the lightning spear if you choose. And then you're likely going to need attributes on your gloves, dexterity or strength. And then for the rune slots on the gloves, we use the Rune of Cruelty here for 15% increased magnitude of damaging ailments you inflict. Then for the belt, you're basically filling out things that are gaps in your build. For me right now with my gear, I needed chaos resistance for sure, lightning resistance, and then strength. If I take this off, I break. That's how tight the attributes are here. And then, of course, always looking for armor and max life. We'll go into the defensive profile. And lastly, for the chest piece, an armor evasion split over 1,000 for both is optimal. But the most important defensive there is the evasion. You want to make sure that you're bringing evasion on your chest piece in order to get close to 70% evasion on the tooltip. Then for the rest, you're definitely going to need at least 2 really good rolls on elemental resistance, if not 3, and then bringing the max life on here as well. Then for flasks and charms, really nothing special here that I have equipped. Again, there is a unique staunching charm that you can get. There are other unique charms out there like Utopia that are really nice. If you find those, it's great. This is all preference stuff. Right now, I've got the stone charms in. And then we are not using Concoct or Ambrosia. So your flasks, basically whatever you prefer. I like the gain charges per second. All right, so just want to bring up some alternatives and some thoughts about when you're scaling this along the way. Morias, you can find pretty affordable Morias on the market. This chest piece really helped me get through the scaling process in the end game on this build. Highly recommend. I would probably even still be wearing one if I didn't drop this chest piece. But the reason why I have 2 Morias here is you can see there are different modifiers that can roll. In this case, we're getting elemental resistance per socket and chaos resistance per socket. So this would help if you're really struggling with the elemental resistances and the chaos. Whereas this has the maximum life per socket field instead of elemental. Overall, a very adaptable defensive chest piece here that is very helpful for this build. And then if you're not quite at the point where you've got your critical hit chance and your crit damage bonus where you need it, and the Tangle Tongue just isn't really working for you, these are the types of spears. These are the spears I ran with. I picked this one up very early in League and it really carried me. But it had the added critical hit chance. It doesn't have the plus level to melee skills or projectile skills. Then for the spears, if you're not quite there with your critical hit chance and critical damage bonus, and Tangle Tongue just really isn't working for you, these are the spears that I ran with. I picked this one up really early in League, but you can see the added critical hit chance, the high flat physical damage, and increased physical damage. This spear slaps. It's really good. Then once I shifted into the 2 weapon sets, this is the spear I picked up. I was definitely looking at Sea Glass for the additional critical hit chance, this one at 11.61, and then picking up the +3 level to all melee skills was really nice. But this is a representation of the spear I was using prior to moving over to Tangle Tongue. A good Tangle Tongue, even if you don't have the critical hit chance and damage bonus to like one-shot bosses, it's still gonna serve you very well out there. So it's basically preference and what you can find and what you can pick up on the market. You can get Tangle Tongues pretty damn cheap, whereas spears like this are typically priced pretty high. You can still find deals like within the market. And then as the Ritualist, of course, you've got the 3rd ring slot, so it's very nice and easy to swap out your rings for whatever you need. So an example here, 40% increased rarity of items found for mapping. You're still targeting that flat damage, physical critical for the bleed, and then any elemental damage helps for your lightning spear as well. Let's move on to skills. Now, I'm not going to go into every gory detail here. I'm going to highlight the synergies and the important things. I'm going to assume that you know Rake, Lightning Spear, Blood Hunt, but this build will be on Mobalytics if you're interested in the details. So first we've got Rake. The important thing to know about Rake is that it deals more damage based on distance traveled. So very important to attack at a distance, and your quality on this improves that additional attack damage based on distance traveled. Also, this has a 100% chance to cause bleeding and deals 100% more magnitude of bleeding. So very big bleed attack here. We've got it supported with deep cuts, which brings 75% more magnitude of bleeding. However, you deal 25% less damage with hits. This works out to be a benefit for this skill. We've got it overextended for more critical damage bonus. The daze doesn't matter. Concentrated effect, 30% more area damage. And then you'll see less area of effect. We don't care about that because we are using Lightning Spear for our clear. This is only for single target. Execute plays into our deepest crown. 50% more damage with hits against enemies that are low life. And then momentum, even more damage based on moving at least 2 meters during a single use of the skill. Now, just looking at the tooltip, we saw Blood Hunt had a 100% crit chance. That's due to some of the supports. But in this case for Rake, our effective chance for a critical hit is nearly 100%. And then our twice critical is at 70%. So a bit lower here. Then we've got Blood Hunt. Blood Hunt is the follow-up to Rake. It consumes the bleeding amount for extra damage, and this is the skill that is exploding bosses. So we've got Inevitable Critical, brings more critical chance after 4 seconds, and we get up to 100% on the twice critical chance. Close Combat, 25% more attack damage. Heft brings a lot of damage to the table here, and then Bloodlust, 30% more melee physical damage against bleeding enemies. And then we've got Impale. This is the big ticket support here for Blood Hunt. So what this does is Blood Hunt will go in and store 30% of its pre-medication physical hit damage as magnitude, and then the next attack is going to extract that for the extra 30%. So after a Blood Hunt, if it does not outright blow up a boss, you are then following up with your next Rake, and that Rake is going to do massive amounts of bleed damage. It will delete a T4 Pinnacle boss. The important thing here is not to disengage after using Blood Hunt. You want to move out, roll out, because you don't want disengage to extract the Impale. You need your Rake to extract the Impale. That is the combo at work here. Then we've got Lightning Spear. This is our wave clear. This is actually what the build will be using in most cases. This is deleting rares. So mapping is essentially, this is a Lightning Spear build right up until you need to go single target. And in order to do both of those things, which are kind of contrasting with each other, a physical based bleed ability versus an elemental Lightning Spear, that is why we are using the 2 weapon sets and the weapon set passive trees. So for the Lightning Spear, to support it, essentially we're just bringing as much additional damage as possible. I just want Lightning Spear to slap as hard as possible. So we've got Volt, Perpetual Charge, Deliberation, Primal Armament, and Fork. Fork is super strong with Lightning Spear, especially with the Tangled Tongue. And then Perpetual Charge, Frenzy Charged Lightning Spears are the key. You want to be generating a lot of Frenzy here, and Perpetual Charge helps with that sustainment of the Frenzy charges. Bloodhound's Mark, this was super useful early on and as I was scaling the build, but as we started to scale, it got to the point where Bloodhound's Mark really doesn't bring a whole lot to the table here. I still apply it to the bosses, but we're not heavy stunning a T4 Pinnacle boss. We are breaking the armor, which is nice, but typically they're dying anyways at this point. So if I were to drop the unset ring for perhaps another breach ring or maybe another venopuncture, this is the skill that I would drop from the build. We support with single out for the broken armor, break posture for days, physical mastery, rupture to aggravate bleeding if we haven't aggravated with our beetle bites, and then inspiration because this is very costly. Next we've got Spearfield. Again, then another skill that was super useful in the leveling and scaling process, but has fallen off recently as we've gotten to the end game. However, it does bring rage, so I still use this to build up rage on a boss, you know, lay it down at the front end, and then pin to help with frenzy charge generation if you need it. Martial tempo because the skill is super slow, and we're not using it on lightning spear in this case because I like the lightning spear to just slap as hard as possible. I'm fine with the slower attack speed. However, for quality of life reasons, you may choose to swap martial tempo out onto your lightning spear, which is fine. Lacerate, I don't pick up a whole lot of chance to inflict bleeding, so this helps. And then rearm. Next, we've got disengage as a mobility option. We support with shocking leap, culmination, ingenuity, blind, and unyielding. Of these, ingenuity is the really important one. This allows you to go in for an attack, disengage, go in for an attack, and disengage right away. Without ingenuity, you're going to have the cooldown in the way. Now we get to our spirit gems. We've got Wind Dancer for increased evasion and defensive with the Gale Force. Very standard here. Maim, Life Thief, Unabating, and Unbreakable. These are basically personal preference, but there are other options out there. Essentially, when you get hit and when you're using the skill, bringing in more defensives and such are really nice. And then applying things like Maim, Blind, that is also very nice. Combat Frenzy is necessary for the build to generate those frenzy charges, and I've got Perfusion on here. If you end up with extra spirit, essentially just bring in spirit buffs on your combat frenzy. Herald of Lightning, because we're using the lightning spear, I moved out of Herald of Blood and in favor of lightning here. And this is how we're generating frenzy charges. We support lightning spear to generate electrocution. Electrocute is how we get the frenzy charges. We've got neural overload, long shot, lightning infusion, electrocute, and deadly herald. And lastly, we've got War Banner. Now, this is a very powerful buff for this build. When I drop a War Banner at full charge, it will bring 50% additional damage to my attacks. And even if I drop it with just 10 charges, it's a significant buff for the duration. So I really enjoy laying this down on uniques, pinnacle bosses, but even on a breach or so, if I start to get overwhelmed, I'll lay this down and just clear the screen guaranteed. So we support with persistence for more time, magnified effect, and then clarity. All right, so now let's move on to passives, starting with the Ascendancy. So pretty standard here. We take the reduced maximum mana, but I guess that's preference. And then, of course, Unfurled Finger, Mystic Attunement for the rings, very strong. Then we've got life recovery rate with Wildwood Persistence. This is why you want to take some regen on your gear. Make sure that you're taking advantage of this node. Then we take the added physical damage and corrupted life force for Blood Boil. Now with Lightning Spear, we're clearing the screen. Blood Boil doesn't really have much of an effect, but you can support your Blood Boil, and we do have Swift Affliction and Brutality in it. Let's go over the passive tree. I'm not going to go over every detail here. The details are in Mobalytics. I'll go over the most important things. So again, we're using weapon sets, but across the board for both sets, the most important things are this low life wheel here, absolutely necessary, brings increased damage against enemies that are on low life, which is any enemy in our presence due to our helm. And then stars aligned, damage with hits is lucky against enemies that are on low life. This makes Heft a very strong support gem, which we have in Blood Hunt. 30% more maximum physical hit damage, so it's increasing the maximum, and then rolling twice to get lucky, you're more likely to get a higher end hit. Then since we're over here on the mercenary side, it's great to pick up Lay Siege and increase damage while holding a shield, increase damage per 1% chance to block. Earlier, you saw the shields with the increased block chance, and with the notes that we've picked up, we do have 72% chance to block. And since we're here, our evasion 65% and armor at 51%. So we are doing the split between armor and evasion, and then bringing the added chance to block here. With that, we do pick up backup plan, which is a very strong node. Increased evasion if you have been hit recently, and then 50% increased armor if you haven't been been hit recently. And then of course, armor and evasion, 12% increased armor and evasion rating. Sticking with the defensives, this is why we travel out this direction to pick up our evasion here. Very strong wheel, enhanced reflexes for the 30% evasion rating and increased dex, and then bestial skin, 100% increased evasion rating from equipped body armor. This is why it's super important to have that evasion on your chest piece. Sticking with the defensives for the build here, we do pick up shield expertise, increased block chance, and that increased block recovery, which is very nice. And then to really push the percent chance to block, we get glancing hits, which brings 30% increased block chance. However, you do take 10% of damage from your blocked hits. So we invest heavily in block chance without taking glancing blows, which would mean 50% of the damage from blocked hits is taken versus our 10%. I find that this really bolsters our defensives, and we're still able to reach nearly cap on our block chance, which plays into lay siege. Now, sticking with this, our anointment is offensive stance, which brings another 1% increased damage per 1% chance to block. So you can see we really play into the shield block chance here. It increases our defensives and our offensives by a ton. Since we're out here, we might as well mention our From Nothing Diamond. Zilot's Oath brings 75% increased attack damage. Very strong option. There are other options out there, but this is the one that I chose. So this tree makes use of 3 jewel slots, which is a bit low, but we make best use with a From Nothing and a Mega Lomaniac Diamond here. So Projectile Bulwark and Tempered Mind is what I landed on. Increased armor, and then defend with 120% armor against projectile attacks. Very strong node. And then Tempered Mind, increased critical damage bonus, plus 10 to strength, and increased physical damage. Extremely strong. And for our third jewel here, we've got increased block chance, again, very strong for the build, some life regen that plays into our ascendancy, rage when hit by an enemy, but most importantly, 15% increased magnitude of bleeding you inflict. That's a max roll on the magnitude of bleeding. Additionally, you could be looking for those crit modifiers, which again are very strong here. Then to round out the main passive tree, we're picking up a bunch of critical wheels here. So we've got the heart stopping, struck through, heartbreaking. Of course, the spear wheel here brings 40% increased critical damage bonus with spears and some crit hit chance. Then we've got Tainted Strike, Dispatch Foes, and Cooked. All in all, brings tons of crit hit chance and crit damage bonus, allowing us to scale the Tangle Tongue into that T4 Xesht highlight kill you saw earlier. And then for our weapon set number 1, this is our bleed weapon set. Really, it's wasting, fast-acting toxins, perfectly placed knife, and deterioration that we're trying to pick up to bring in more magnitude of bleeding, more critical hit chance on bleeding enemies, more magnitude for our critical hits, faster bleeding. It's all about the bleed here, and that's why we had to switch over with 2 weapon sets, because that does not help our lightning spear whatsoever. And then for the lightning spear weapon set, the big thing is Coming Calamity, 50% increased lightning damage while affected by Herald of Thunder. We don't need that for bleed or blood hunt. And then I fill out the increased movement speed, evasion, and increased movement speed, skill speed here for lightning spear, which is mainly what we're using for mapping wave clear. We're using it all the time, so moving and acting faster is nice. And then for the other points, filled out the critical wheels here completely for added crit hit chance and critical damage bonus. We're gonna fill out the last few points for increased lightning damage into increased electrocute buildup, just to ensure that we're generating those frenzy charges, because frenzy charged lightning spear is way better than non-frenzy charged. Then we've got one little point here in stun threshold just to help out with our the light stunning that's going on. This extra 20% is pretty big. There's a big difference between having this node and not having this node. But if it's not an issue for you based on your gear and whatnot, feel free to spend it elsewhere. I like having this point here. If you see ways to improve this build, please drop a comment. I'm always looking to improve. And if you'd like to be involved in the overall making of these builds and of my video content on YouTube, join the live stream. That's where I'm getting a lot of my ideas from the community in chat, and I'd love to see you there. If you've made it this far, please be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Trying to grow the channel. Let's keep it going. Until next time.